Hi, everybody. This is Nadia from Go Play. We're here today with Martin Wallace, who is a local games designer originally hailing from the UK. Martin is the founder and chief designer of Tree Frog Games and now Wallace Designs. Martin is known for designing complex strategy games that depict a variety of historical settings. You might know some of his games: Discworld, Ankh-Morpork, Doctor Who, The Card Game, Study in Emerald, and Bloodstones, to name only a few of his pretty incredible list. His game, Fighting Fantasy Adventures, just funded, so congratulations, Martin. And yes, Martin's been generous enough to speak with me today, and we're hoping that he'll share his wisdom on all things board gaming and conventions. As we do know, we have quite a few games designers that like to show their wares and play test their games at Go Play. It's something that we encourage, but we do know it can be a little intimidating. And so I'm hoping that Martin can shed a little light on us on that today. So thank you so much for joining us, Martin.
No, thank you. Thank you for inviting me to the interview. Pleasure to meet you.
Thanks. So I suppose just first up, I think a lot of people will probably know your name from a lot of beloved board games, but can you just tell us a little about yourself, and mostly how you came to have the job that you have now?
I think job's the wrong word. Obsession is the word my wife would use. Um, it is a vocation rather than a job, because you've got to be crazy to be a game designer, because it's really difficult to make money as a board game designer. Um, so yeah, as to how I got here, um, I don't know. I honestly don't know. Um, there's something that clicked in my brain around about the time I was 30. I mean, I played games before. You played games as a kid. Uh, used to work at Games Workshop for a while. So I'd always been into games, but I'd never thought about being a game designer. And then suddenly I'd thought, yeah, I'd like to be a game designer. And I have no idea why. Um, and yeah, then just started trying to design games, most of which are rubbish. Um, Eventually managed to design something that was actually sort of okay, which I self-published. I think it's back in 1993, probably before you were born. Probably. You
Not
don't
quite
have to answer
close.
that. Close, close. Yeah, that was a bit rude, wasn't it? That was, yeah. Oh, sorry. Slap on the wrist. Anyway, and yeah, yeah, that was Lords of Creation, and then in 1994, because I was living in the UK then, in Manchester, and in 1994 was the first year I went to Spiel in Essen, which is the biggest game show on the planet. And that introduced me to this whole world of game design. And it's like, just as an example, there's a gentleman who came up to the booth first year there. I won't go into all the details because that would be a podcast in itself. Um, and bought a copy of the game. And the next year he came back and informed me he was working for. He told me at the time he was a games journalist. He wanted to review the game. Came back following year, said, "Oh, I've got a job with a games company. We're looking for game submissions," and that led to my first published game by a German company. But that person is now the chief editor of Cosmos, who are the people who produce Catan and the Exit games and stuff like that. And so it's just like, I suppose it's an example of how, and I don't know if it's going to lead on to questions about being a game designer in Australia, but there's nothing that can beat networking. Just being in the right place at the right time, meeting somebody who over the years has been instrumental in helping me get games published. Like Anno 1800 was the latest one, because so we meet every year. We just meet every year for lunch at Essen. Doesn't matter whether I've got anything to show. We just meet, chat, catch up, and so on. And then sometimes, oh, have you got a game for us? And I'll see what I've got. But yeah, Essen's been a key part of my life. And yeah, just things have carried on from there. Eventually, I turned full time around about 2007. Um, Became a full time game designer. I've been a full time game designer ever since, which is still a struggle. I think some people think game designers are rich, and I can assure you, no, they're not. Well, some are, but most aren't. Um, but anyway, I do okay.
That's excellent. Thank you. I suppose I do have like a slight offshoot question there, which
Mm,
is because you've been doing this for so long, and as you've said, it's not so straightforward, and you know your successes don't always send you in a complete upwards trajectory. There are
mm.
challenges and there are things that you face. What do you think about your attitudes or your work has meant that you've persisted where others might find themselves, you know, going into another venture, or, you know, burnt out by the amount of work that it might take to be a designer?
Um, it's definitely the case that if you want to be a successful game designer, the odds are you're going to have to really, really work hard at it. And I suppose the problem is people see the instant successes. So if you take Elizabeth Hargreave, for instance, her first published game was Wingspan. Um, Richard Garfield, his first published game was Magic the Gathering. I mean, you can't top that, really, can you? Your first game changes the industry
Mm.
out of all shape, you know. So there are some people, and there's numerous examples of people who they somehow strike it lucky with their first game, it goes boom. Um, and there are other people, and there are numerous other designers who take the other route where they have to kind of do their apprenticeship, where they just have to keep chipping away and working at it and building up and accumulating experience and keep going. An example of that would be Bruno Catala, a French designer, who eventually achieved success with King Domino. But he'd been working as a game designer for years and nobody really knew him. He still had to keep the day job. And then eventually he got to that point where he had that breakthrough and that big success. So there are different routes uh, to the top. And there's no guarantee you're going to make it. Because I think there is something, to a certain degree, there's a certain degree of where game design is hard work, where you work at it, where you hone your craft, you practice, you keep designing stuff and you chuck stuff away and you keep going and you keep going, you keep going. And you can learn a lot from that. But in my experience, I still feel there's a kind of 10% which some people have. And if you don't have that, I have this feeling that no matter how hard you will work, you won't get there. But I don't know what this 10% is. It's not intelligence. I can vouch for that because I didn't get a great education. I'm definitely not a super clever guy. You take Rainer Knizia, who is used to, before he became a successful game designer, he was running a major sector of Deutsche Bank. So very clever guy, very super clever guy. There are a lot of these game designers out here who are super clever, but I also come across people who are really, really intelligent. I mean, way more intelligent than me. And they have a go at game design, and what they come up with is rubbish. So it's nothing to do with how clever you are. It's just, I don't know, it's an aptitude. It's something you either have or you don't. I suppose another example, there's a lady, she unfortunately passed away a few years ago, Maureen Hiron, who you probably haven't heard of, but she was a very, very successful English game designer. But she operated in the area of light games. So she used to do the kind of games that would sell in their millions because they were light family games. And she just had this awesome ability just to invent a game in like seconds. She could just literally turn her mind, to something, and a minute later she would have this amazingly simple game, and it's like, I can't do that. I've tried doing that. It's just like not something I can do. So it is mostly hard work, but there is this percentage where you've either got it or you haven't.
Mm.
And if you haven't got it, I don't know what you do. But you don't know until you try. Um, so as to hard work, I used to be a teacher. This is way easier. Teaching's really, really hard work. I have a great life.
Yeah,
Yeah.
fabulous. All right, it sounds like as you were speaking, what was coming up for me, these concepts around growth mindset,
Mm,
where there are people with, you say, this natural and raw intelligence, but
mm,
if they only believe in their aptitude and ability, they're more likely to be really deeply challenged by difficulties that they come across. But if you
mm.
put your power into that grit and that hard work, and you learn from your mistakes and you're persistent, then you can move forward. And and you can get a lot of positive feeling out of that as well. So
Yeah.
yeah, as you were talking, Martin, that came up for me, and in terms of um, how, what your attitudes might be.
Mm. It's also, I mean, as much as possible, I try to interact with local aspiring game designers. There used to be a thing. I used to go Thursday night down in Maruka, which kind of ceased now. There's some kind of BBQ adjacent events that Michael Roberts runs that I go to. Um, I think what's interesting, I think there's um, a lot of game designers. I think they're just kind of going for a very quick, simple kind of, let's try and do a hit game in a simple way. And that's not always necessarily the best path to follow. In the sense that the best example I can give is a game like Gloomhaven. And I mean, Gloomhaven is not a game. I played it once. Okay, that was enough. It's not my kind of game. Um, but that doesn't mean it's a badly designed game. It's an awesome game. It is an incredible achievement, and I think it is an example of how you don't necessarily have to be a great designer. Because I mean, Isaac, lovely guy, met him a couple of times. I kind of feel what I know from his other stuff. I don't think he is an amazing designer in the way that he couldn't turn. I don't think he could turn his hand to doing like really simple games or other stuff. But at what he does do, he's awesome.
The niche. Mm.
Yeah, and I think for some game designers, I think it's a case of rather than trying to be like somebody else, it's like, oh, I want to be like René Knizia, or I want to be like Wolfgang Kramer, or I want to be like Shem Phillips, or something like that, or Vital Lacerda. And it's like, well, maybe you need to be like yourself, because I think one of the reasons why Gloomhaven succeeded was because of passion, and people notice passion. If you just do, I because I see a lot of aspiring game designers, and they just copy. A lot of them just copy other games without knowing what they're doing, or they copy mechanisms from other games. And it's not necessarily a bad thing, because it can be a ladder to finding your own voice. In the same way that back in the day, a lot of pop bands, they do cover songs before they found their own voice. Or they do songs written for them before they started writing their own songs. So it's not necessarily a bad thing. But I do think to be a successful game designer, somehow you've got to find your own groove. Like, in a sense, going back to Shem Phillips, I mean, again, I'm not a big fan of worker placement, but I total respect to the guy that he managed to build a brand and a successful line of games from the back end of New Zealand. I mean, this is like the most isolated spot on the planet. Because I used to live in New Zealand. I've been down that way. It's like, how do you do that? So that is an example of how you even if you are in Australia, even if you are isolated, it is still possible to achieve this dream. Um, but yeah, I think somehow you have to have your own individual, unique voice, and it's very difficult telling people what that can be, because you know, yeah, it's not always easy to identify which directions to go in game design. But anyway, I'm probably rambling now. It's
I
anyway. Next question.
No, that was a fantastic set of thoughts there, Martin. Thank you so
Mm,
much. I think that what I'm really curious about, because obviously Go Play is coming up, people are
mm,
starting to put their game submissions in, starting to think about play testing, and we'll have a lot of local designers.
mm,
I think that they would really like to know, especially if they've never been in a convention environment before,
mm.
how do you best use the convention to your benefit with playtesting? Is it different to a normal playtesting environment? Is it just the same? How have conventions been for you in the past as a designer?
Um, so that's quite a difficult question for me to ask because I've been doing this for a long time, and playtesting now isn't an issue. I do remember when I first started. It is kind of awkward. I do have this memory, even though it's over 30 years ago, in that you've designed your first game, and or and it's like, how do I get people to play this? Because it feels like you're imposing on people. Like, oh, would you play my game rather than this commercially successful game, which you're guaranteed to enjoy? Because the thing with playtesting, the first time you playtest a game, the odds are it's going to fail. I mean, the odds are it's going to be a terrible experience because that is the nature of game design. It's an iterative process where you try your first game and then it fails, and then you go back, you redo it, you try it again, it fails, and you keep going back until eventually you have something successful. And it's difficult asking people to help you through that process, um, which is why something like Go Play and some of the other organizations in Brisbane are so useful, where you've got people who actively want to help you, who say, yes, I understand this is a playtest. I understand there's a very good chance this will fail, but I'm happy to partake in this process and give you feedback. So, so you kind of have to be, I don't know, put to one side your kind of guilty feelings, like you're going to let this crowd down by doing something which is going to disappoint them. It's like it's a learning experience. Okay, you just have to treat everything as a learning experience. I suppose it's a little bit like being an actor in that 90% of the time you're going to be rejected by whatever audition you go for, but you have to go through that process to eventually be accepted for a part. And game design is very similar in that way, and that it can be quite a long, painful process before you get to something which is marketable. Um, Now, adding to that, definitely going to conventions, trying your game with other people, definitely a good thing. Because as we all know, you do not use your family as the basis for working out whether your game is good enough. Your family is a no-no. It's just like just because your mum likes your game doesn't mean it's a good game. She's just really impressed that you could probably string a few letters together. Anything you do is going to make her happy. So it's good going out and playtesting with strangers. And as I say, I mean, so I go to the Woolowin thing that Michael Roberts organizes every now and again, and I do playtest other people's games, and I'm hard. I'm quite horrible. So if you're going to playtest your game with me, expect to get really, really harsh feedback because I mean, I'm not a nasty person, I don't think, but I'm just I like to be honest. And the reality is, there is no point in lying to people and say, "Oh, that's a great game," when it's not.
Yeah.
Because the thing is, the marketplace will decide. There's no point in misleading somebody. Say, "Oh, you got a great game there. Oh, why don't you go and show it to such and such a person or such and such a person?" Because I know I'm just wasting their time. So, um, yeah.
May I
Um,
ask, do you think that
mm,
that you should have your game at a certain playable point before taking it into a convention setting? Is there
yeah.
a look for a beta over an alpha? What
Yeah,
do yeah.
absolutely, definitely. I think you shouldn't go to a convention. I would never go to a convention. I would with something that I hadn't tested with my group of friends. Now, I'm lucky in that I have a good network of people that I can go to for that alpha testing. Um, so I can do that in private, and if it works, great. If it fails, it's a secret. But yeah, you really should not be going to a convention with something that isn't already showing signs of progress. Um, but again, it's difficult. I'm lucky and I have that network, but it I don't know how easy or hard it is for other aspiring game designers to find that support network. Now, having said that, it's a hell of a lot easier now than when I started out, because you do have organizations like yourself. You have the internet where di- you know uh, people in the same boat can kind of get together and say, "I'll test your game if you test mine." So in that sense, it's actually probably a lot easier now than it was a long time ago. Um, you just have the downside though, that the market itself is just so crowded. Um, when I started, there were very, very few game designers around, and it wasn't hard to attract attention, because it's literally like in the field I was in, of doing like the more complex games. You might be looking at 10 games in a year being published of that level. Most games would be family level games. So it really was not hard to stand out in that field. Whereas now, where you might have 10,000 games a year, I don't know.
Kickstarter and the
Can,
like has
oh,
obviously made a huge impact there.
yes. Yeah. And it can work to your benefit. And we see the examples, people like Isaac Childress, Shem Phillips, Jamie Stegmaier. There are certain people who've used Kickstarter as a platform to launching wonderful careers. So it's both a positive and a negative. Um, but you also have to be careful with Kickstarter. And I had this, I remember the beginning of that, there was a couple of different people I met who had this presumption, oh, I've got this game, I'm going to do it on Kickstarter. And it's like, what can go wrong? It's like everything. It's like there really should be a big warning. It's like, don't design a game and just put it on Kickstarter. It's just no. Before you go to Kickstarter, you have to have a long-term game plan. You have to work out, what career path do you want? You can't just simply go there with a game and then see if that works and then suddenly start think, oh, now I'll do another one. It's like, before you go to Kickstarter, you need to have at least 3 games ready to go. And another thing I always tell people at Kickstarter is, you never go to Kickstarter with your best game. You never start with your best game, because you will you're just wasting your time, because the first game you do on Kickstarter is all about gaining the confidence of people out there.
Mm.
And you can see this time and time again, where people have done it successfully. Like with Jamie Stegmaier, he goes the first time he goes with Viticulture, which is okay. It's a nice worker placement game, and in my opinion, it's a little bit derivative. But then I've been in the industry for a long time, so I've seen a lot. But then he kind of ramps it up by doing other games, and eventually leading to Scythe, which, again, not something I would choose to play, but in many respects a very original style game. Now, if he'd started with Scythe, I don't think that would have been as popular, because people didn't know Jamie.
Yeah,
Can
you're
this guy deliver?
building your
Hmm?
community and your following.
You have to build a community, and you have to have a gameplay. Again, you look at Shem Phillips also did as well. The first game, I think it was Raiders of the North Sea or something. He did okay, not amazing, but he built on that. And that's the thing. So if you're going to use Kickstarter, if you want to have this career as a game designer, if you're going to use crowdfunding as a thing, you have to have a game plan. It's not enough just to have a game. You got to work out the path you want to take. Um, so yeah, because the other thing is, trust me, your game can do okay on crowdfunding, but you can still lose money on it.
Yeah.
because it's very, very expensive producing a game. And I get, I know this from experience, because I mean, I'm in the situation that yes, Bloodstone's funded. That's great. The Fighting Fantasy thing funded. But the thing is, for me to keep, because I'm trying to establish a company, I've got umpteen projects on the go at the moment that I'm forking out money for artwork that are months away from ever being produced. That's a lot of money that I'm sinking into stuff. Um, so you do have this situation. If you're going to do it seriously, there's a lot to it. Now I'm fortunate. I've run my own production company before, so I know what's involved. I'm also lucky now that I have a really good team. Like Cassie, who's a friend of yours. She's an awesome project manager, and because one of the things I wanted to do, I wanted to build a team of people in Brisbane that I can physically meet with. That's been one of the things I've been um, very, certain this is what I want. You want, because you can't do it on your own anymore. You need a team, and these people need paying. They're not going to do it for nothing. So yeah, if you want to go down the crowdfunding route, it's a lot scarier than you think. Don't just assume you're going to do a game and you're going to make millions, because that is not the reality. But anyway.
And because we've got about 5 minutes left, I really
Oh,
want
okay.
sorry. This
I
is
didn't realize there's a time limit.
this is my free Zoom account because
Oh, right,
so
right.
it's
Okay.
literally
Yeah,
limited to
sorry.
20
I've been
minutes.
rambling on. I apologize.
No,
Go on.
but
Anyway, great.
your rambles
Ask
have been
ask the question.
incredible, Martin. There is so much
Hmm.
wisdom and I appreciate it. I just wanted to give you the opportunity to talk about your current game, Fighting Fantasy Adventures, what's happening with it at the moment, and anything that you want to talk about. You've got a couple of minutes.
Yep. So, Fighting Fantasy Adventures, it just funded. So yeah, the next step is getting the artwork sorted out. So, I have a Brisbane-based artist. The bizarre thing is he's living in the UK at the moment because he's English and he's over there at the moment. Um, so it's like, yeah, getting Rupert back over here. So it's like, okay, Rupert, start doing the artwork. So it's going to be the artwork is going to be the big thing. There's a lot of artwork involved in this game because there's 5 adventures in each game. This is the biggest project I have ever done. Some people, including my wife, would say I'm crazy. She thinks I'm obsessed because the thing with the Fighting Fantasy thing, it's not a one-off game. It's a series of games. And one of the things I learned, it's like if a game called Time Stories that Space Cowboys did a number of years ago, and I used to do stuff for Space Cowboys, and I remember being over there before Time Stories was released, and they'd already done all the artwork for the first 2 expansions before they released the game. Because the thing is, you have to do that because if the game you release the game is going to be successful, you have to be ready to go with the next thing within months. And you can't do a cold start. And that's a similar thing with the Fighting Fantasy thing. It's like, okay, yeah, we funded this, but I also now have to get on and do the next campaign and then the next one, because they have to be ready to roll. Because if, touch wood, it takes off, we have to be able to quickly respond with new product, because
Yeah.
that's what keeps the thing alive, which is a massive upfront investment in art costs. And I'm not a rich guy. It's a bit scary, but one way or another, we'll get there. So yeah, it is. I don't think people realize what a massive undertaking is. I think this is something people from the outside just think these games appear from nowhere without realizing how much effort and hard work goes into them in the background. But one of the things I do want to try and do with the Fighting Fantasy thing, I do want to try and open up the system so that other people, and I've reached out to a number of people in the Brisbane area about this already, is to say, okay, well, this is a vehicle for telling stories. This is a way that you can do a fantasy adventure or a sci-fi adventure or something. It doesn't have to be based in the Fighting Fantasy world. And one of the things I want to look at is for those people who they might not have what it takes to be a game designer, but they're a good storyteller, or they're a good artist or something like that. And it's like, well, here's something you can use to tell a story that has potential commercial value. Um, And that's definitely something I want to explore. I mean, one of the things we're going to be doing is trying to put artwork up so that people can grab artwork and make their own adventures. I mean,
Mm,
this is something I learned from Age of Steam back in the day when we released Age of Steam, a train game. People started making their own maps, and it was great because that allowed them to interact with the hobby, create something without them having to become a full-time game designer. Because some people don't have what it takes to be a top level game designer, but they do have the ability to tell a story or do something else, you know. And so this is, I see this as has the potential to be a structure that allows a vehicle that allows other people to produce commercially viable product. But we will
perhaps like
see.
a
No
bit like
promises, but
D&D,
hmm?
D&D Beyond, and all of the
Yes,
online
absolutely.
materials that make it a bit more
Yeah.
accessible. That's brilliant.
Mm,
I'm really keen to hear more, but I might actually need to say that we have to wrap the interview up.
okay.
Because
Yeah.
again, unfortunately,
Mm,
my 40-minute account on Zoom. So I guess I just wanted to
mm,
spend the last couple of seconds saying thank you so much.
mm.
In this short space of time, you provided us with so much wisdom, and I know the Go Play designers and players and participants of all kinds are going to really appreciate the fact that you've given us your time. We won't see Martin at Go Play this year, but we will in future years, hopefully.
Yep.
But thank you so much. I'm going to pause here and say have a fantastic night.
Thank you for that.